Intellectual virtues are the deep personal qualities or character strengths required for good thinking and learning. They are cultivated dispositions to act, think, and feel in particular ways. The intellectual virtue of judgment is central to leader character. Any leader's most important role in an organization is making good judgments, well-informed, wise decisions that produce desired outcomes. When a leader shows consistently good judgment, little else matters. When he or she shows poor judgment, nothing else matters. Judgment has been defined as the willingness to search actively for evidence against your favorite beliefs, plans, or goals, and to weigh all of the evidence fairly when it's available. It involves making rational and logical choices, analytically evaluating ideas, opinions, and facts. It is critical thinking. It involves weighing the evidence fairly, thinking things through, and examining evidence from all sides rather than jumping to conclusions. Judgment also involves being open-minded, being able to change one's mind in light of evidence, remaining open to other arguments and perspectives. It's actually a strength of what we call the head, one of the thinking-oriented character strengths. In reality, people rarely have the time or the inclination to ferret out every potentially relevant piece of information or consider every possibility view when they look at making a decision. Usually, we quickly identify the key pieces of information and weigh those. It is this process of identifying the critical details, thinking about them clearly and fairly, that is the hallmark of a person with good judgment. That being said, compared to most others, people with good judgment also consider more options, to the point that she or he can feel as though they have a 360-degree view of the problem or the situation or the idea. This actually helps to see things clearly and to avoid common thinking traps such as catastrophizing, where we start thinking that a small problem is a big one, making a mountain out of a molehill. A person with good judgment tries to avoid thinking in ways that favor their current views or look for information that's consistent with their views. What they do is they seek out multiple sources and viewpoints. Research findings on the benefits of good judgment suggest that people who can see things from more than one perspective are particularly skilled in dealing with times of change and transition. They also find that judgment counteracts biased thinking and thus contributes to more accurate decision making. Open-mindedness, which is actually a result of good judgment, contributes to developing a broader understanding of how people find deeper meaning and purpose in life. Individuals with this virtue of judgment are less swayed by singular events and more resistant to suggestion and manipulation. The intellectual virtue of judgment can help us make decisions and be someone who evaluates different sides of an issue fairly, with no or limited biases, and without jumping to conclusions. When we are at our very best in using judgment, we weigh issues, we try to be objective in balancing options, and we are flexible in that we are willing to change our minds in light of new evidence. The intellectual virtue of judgment is critical to leadership success. When a leader has good judgment, he or she makes sound decisions in a timely manner that's based on relevant information and a critical analysis of facts. Such leaders appreciate the broader context when reaching decisions. They show flexibility when confronted with new information or new situations, and they have an implicit sense of the best way to proceed. When you as a leader have good judgment, you can see into the depth of challenging issues and you can reason effectively in uncertain and ambiguous situations. Thought leaders Mary Croson, Gerard Sech, and Jeffrey Gantz suggest that there are 9 specific elements that illustrate and combine to foster the dimension of judgment in leaders. They tell us that when we are judicious, we are situationally aware, cognitively complex, analytical, decisive, thinking critically, intuitive, insightful, pragmatic, and adaptable. We're going to look at each of these character elements individually. Leaders who are situationally aware demonstrate an appreciation for unique circumstances that may dictate unique approaches. For instance, one might be a very good leader in one situation, but as the dynamics change, the situation, the team, or the challenge at hand, there are aspects of our leadership approach that must also change. We have to learn to be effective leaders in different environments. We have to be careful not to come into a new situation with an approach based on a previous experience. Our effectiveness can derail if we're not thoughtfully assessing how we might impact the new situation or the new team. Interestingly, Croissant, Sedgitz, and Gans suggest that a lack of situational awareness may explain why we usually end up needing so many different kinds of leaders for different situations. For all leaders, it's unrealistic to expect that you're going to have a job description that delineates everything that will be expected of you. Leaders today need to have comfort with ambiguity, complexity, uncertainty, and volatility. As we have seen in the 2020 COVID paradigm, leaders have to be able to pivot and navigate challenging situations that are marked by rapid change. Leaders who exhibit analytical thinking skillfully analyze new situations and employ logical reasoning. In many circumstances, they may have to focus intensely on acquiring new situational specific knowledge to achieve a level of competency and to be able to make judgments. Decisive leaders make astute, level-headed decisions in a timely way. They show a clear-sighted discernment of what is required in any given situation. They are willing to make tough decisions, communicate tough things. They often note that while it's hard to be decisive, doing nothing could actually make things worse. We have really already dug in pretty deep into critical thinking a few weeks ago, but just as a reminder, in light of the ever-increasing complexity of school leadership, never before have critical thinkers been such an important resource. Critical thinkers are adept at defining the path of problem solving. What is step one? What is step two? And most importantly, they are ready, willing, and able to instantly revise those steps as new information becomes available. The word intuition comes from the Latin verb intuere, which is translated as consider, or from the late Middle English word intuit, which means to contemplate. Intuition can be defined as the ability to acquire knowledge without recourse to conscious reasoning. Different fields use the word intuition in very different ways, including, but not limited to, direct access to unconscious knowledge, unconscious cognition, inner sensing, inner insight to unconscious pattern recognition, and the ability to understand something just instinctively. Intuition is often described as a gut feeling, and many times a leader will note that it just felt right. But the fact is that most cases, behind those simple answers are years and years of training, experience, and preparation. Back in 1856, Louis Pasteur noted that in fields of observation, chance only favors the mind that is prepared. He was, of course, referring to scientific discovery, but the parallels to leadership are there. When you operate in situations requiring judgment, you have to come to the table prepared. And in critical moments, leaders have to be prepared to follow their instincts. Insightful leaders grasp the essence of situations. They can see into the heart of challenging issues. Seeing the heart of the problem, and especially being able to see into the future, is an invaluable component of leadership. It is sometimes referred to as being able to tell the difference between ice cubes and icebergs. On the surface, they look the same. Insight is a critical cognitive function that relies on other elements of judgment, but constantly seeks to dig deep for the profound meaning that resides in the data. A person who is pragmatic is concerned with more matters of fact than with what could or should be. A pragmatic person's realm is results and consequences. Pragmatic leaders are very practical thinkers. They focus on the processes behind any task, initiative, or goal. Their top priority is to figure out how the team is going to get things done. Adaptable leaders, as we might imagine, have flexible ways of thinking. For leaders, adaptability is about having ready access to different ways of thinking, enabling leaders to shift and experiment as things change. Having an elastic cognitive approach allows leaders to use different thinking strategies and mental frameworks. Thought leader Thomas Licona notes that good judgment is a big part of good character. He says that helping our students to become thoughtful decision makers goes beyond simply teaching what is right and wrong and why. Licona believes that developing students' decision-making skills means teaching them certain questions or tests they can use to evaluate their own behavior. He suggests that when students face such decisions as, should I let this person copy my homework? Or should I go to the party that my parents would not approve of? Or should I gossip about another student? That there are actually 9 ethical tests that we can teach them to apply. The golden rule would be the first one. The question would be, would I want other people to do this to me? Then there's the fairness test. Is this fair to everybody who might be affected by what I say or do? And who might be affected and how? What if everybody did this test? Would I like it if everyone else did this? Would I want to live in that kind of a world? Then there's the truth test. Does this action represent the whole truth and nothing but the truth? Of course, there's the parents test. How would my parents feel if they found out I did this? What advice would they give me if I asked them if I should do it? For some students, it's the religion test. Does this go against my faith? Then there's the conscience test. Does this go against my conscience? Will I feel guilty afterwards? Then there's the consequence test. Might this have bad consequences such as damage to relationships or maybe a loss of my self-respect now or even later? Might I regret doing this? And then finally, there is the front page test. How would I feel if my actions were reported on the front page of my hometown paper? Now, granted, our students won't apply all these tests to every moral decision they make, but if they apply even some of them, they will make better decisions. Actually, even asking one of these questions could deter a behavior that might bring harm to the student or to others. In addition to the ethical tests, we can also teach our students a problem-solving process to use when they're faced with a dilemma and the best course of action is not clear. Some of the problem-solving steps might be considering alternatives. What are the different ways I could try to solve this problem? We could also teach them to weigh consequences. What are the likely good and bad results of the different alternatives for the people who may be affected, including myself? We can actually have them identify values. What are my moral values that are involved, and which ones are most important? We can also teach them to seek advice. What persons, parents, teachers, siblings, could I ask for help in deciding what to do? And we can also teach them to make a decision. Which course of action does the best job of respecting the important values and achieving the greatest good and the least harm for all those affected? Thomas Lacona emphasizes that advice seeking is especially important to stress with our students. They should know that even adults, if they are wise, don't make important decisions without seeking counsel from at least one person whose judgment they respect. Lacona notes that we should teach our students that important decisions require a clear mind and a calm emotional state. Decisions shouldn't be made when we are tired, stressed, angry, or upset. We will almost never regret taking more time to make an important decision. On the other hand, we may very well regret not taking enough time. So how do we practice and develop better judgment? Well, in relationships, one thing we could do is to go out of our way to discuss topics that are important to us with people whose opinions differ from ours. We can evaluate what we learn from their perspective and consider whether or not we might adjust our opinions. At work, perhaps choose one of our work tasks where there's some disagreement about how to get it done, and use our critical thinking to examine the case for each point of view. In the community, perhaps we could choose a strong opinion that we hold and briefly step into the role of someone with the opposite opinion. And finally, within. The intellectual virtue of judgment helps you to find holes in what other people are saying or how they're acting. But let's turn it inward and use our judgment to evaluate ourselves. Think critically about one of our personality qualities. Consider the pros and cons of this quality and how it impacts us positively and negatively. And of course, to be sure to look for the holes.